Man, I'm so bored. You know what? Maybe I'll just I'll make a video refuting the KALAM Cosmological Argument for the existence of God.
But that's been done before.
I know.
A lot.
I know.
Usually better than you're gonna do.
I know.
Man, you must be really bored.
I know. So, in the interest of laziness, I'm not actually going to make this video from scratch. I'm just going to read off my final philosophy paper, which I got an A on because I'm good at this stuff.
Hey, maybe you should stop bragging and actually make the video.
Maybe you should leave and shut up.
Fine!
And because I'm super lazy, I'm not even going to sit in front of the camera, I'm just going to talk into a microphone and put text on the screen. So, yay laziness.
Perhaps one of the oldest and most widely known arguments for the existence of God is the cosmological argument. This argument uses the simple idea of causation to try and prove the existence of God, and it can be initially phrased as follows. 1. Everything that exists has a cause. 2. The universe exists. 3. Therefore, the universe has a cause. 4. That cause is God. This argument, however, is open to the following counter-argument. 1. Everything that exists has a cause. 2. God exists. 3. Therefore, God has a cause. 4. That cause is another God? This puts the theist in a bad position because if God himself has a cause, then there is a potentially infinite chain of gods causing gods if you just keep plugging each successive god into the argument. But of course, the theist using the cosmological argument isn't trying to prove that there are infinitely many gods causing gods, assuming that's even possible. They are trying to prove that there is one God. So in order to avoid the problem of God having a cause, the argument is usually rephrased in the following way. 1. Everything that begins to exist has a cause. 2. The universe began to exist. 3. Therefore, the universe had a cause. 4. That cause is God. This form of the argument is not open to the same objection as before, that God must have required a cause, because now the theist can simply assert that God never began to exist, so God does not require a cause. This assertion can be justified by pointing out that God is supernatural, and thus he need not be inside the universe, where time exists, and without time, there is no beginning to exist. What makes this version of the cosmological argument seem better than other arguments for the existence of God is that it attempts to incorporate modern science, Big Bang cosmology, into a key premise. This is as opposed to something like the ontological argument, whose key idea is the subjective notion of greatness, which is a debatable concept. The cosmological argument, however, uses no such subjective ideas and instead appeals to objective, scientific ideas. Of course, as this is such an old and widely known argument for the existence of God, it has given rise to many different objections, the first and most obvious being an objection to Premise 4. Premise 4 states that the cause of the universe is God. However, this does not follow from premises 1 through 3. Premises 1 through 3 conclude that the universe had a cause, but how does one justify the assertion that this cause was God? Couldn't premise 4 just as easily be something like, that cause is Bumba, the tribal African deity, or that cause is my supernatural twin brother? After all, saying that the universe had a cause no more points to God as that cause than to Bumba or to my supernatural twin brother, so premise 4 does not follow from premises 1 through 3. And thus the cosmological argument does not prove that God exists. Now, William Lane Craig, a modern proponent of the cosmological argument, would disagree, and in fact does try to say that this argument proves that God exists and not Bumba or my evil twin brother, but that's a topic for another video. So in order to avoid this objection, premise 4 must be removed. We now have an argument that goes like this. 1. Everything that begins to exist has a cause. 2. The universe began to exist. 3. Therefore, the universe had a cause. Using this revised argument, we can no longer conclude that the cause of the universe was anything in particular, much less the God of the Bible. But surely this basic principle of causation is still true for the universe, right? Surely there must be a reason why the universe exists. Unfortunately, while this remaining argument is intuitive, it is simply not valid for a number of reasons. First, it commits the fallacy of equivocation. It equivocates two types of beginning to exist. When we observe things beginning to exist in day-to-day life, manufacturing a car, sculpting a face, etc., what we are witnessing is a cause, e.g. a robot or a sculptor, acting on pre-existing material in order to reform it into something else. And once the robot or sculptor does this, we say that that something else has just begun to exist, a car, sculpture, etc. This is different, however, than the ex nihilo out of nothing type of beginning to exist that the cosmological argument is usually employed to argue for. That is to say, typical proponents of the cosmological argument don't think that God acted on some kind of proto-universe to make it into our current universe. Rather, they believe that God made the universe out of nothing, ex nihilo, but the cosmological argument would force them to conclude otherwise. If we were to avoid this fallacy of equivocation, the argument would have to be rephrased as follows. 1. Everything that begins to exist has a cause that causes it to exist by reforming pre-existing material. 2. The universe began to exist. 3. Therefore, the universe had a cause that caused it to exist by reforming pre-existing material. And this is not what most proponents of this argument actually believe, and would want to argue for. Now, believe it or not, there's actually a second fallacy employed by this argument. This is the composition fallacy. The composition fallacy is a fallacy in which one argues that because the components of X have property Y, then X itself must also have property Y. For example, the atoms that comprise an empty soda can cannot be crushed between my fingers. If we were to employ the composition fallacy, then it would follow that the can itself cannot be crushed between my two fingers. But of course, this is not true. The cosmological argument does the exact same thing. It is true that everything we see within the universe appears to have a cause, but it does not follow from this observation that therefore the universe itself, which is either comprised of these things we see being caused, or simply contains them, also has a cause. Therefore, premise 3 does not follow from premises 1 and 2. And even if the composition fallacy weren't a fallacy, premise 3 would still not follow from premises 1 and 2. This is because logic does not necessarily apply to the universe. Logic is a general description of the way that things within the universe behave, at least on a macroscopic scale. This means that logic does not apply outside or before the universe, so it cannot be logically argued that the universe required a cause just because it is logically entailed by premises 1 and 2. And finally, there's one last point to raise about the cosmological argument. In my opinion, this is not a particularly convincing point, but it's a subtle idea that rarely surfaces in debates about the argument. This is the fact that, technically, the universe never began to exist. It has always existed. There was no point in time at which the universe did not exist, and then later it did exist, because time is a part of the universe. As long as there has been time, there has been our universe. This means that premise 2 is false. So given that the cosmological argument makes the baseless claim that the universe began to exist, it invokes the composition and equivocation fallacies, it fallaciously assumes that logic applies to the universe itself, and it requires that the universe was made out of pre-existing material, I have argued that the cosmological argument is not valid, and it's not even an argument for what most theists believe.